Let's talk copper and, well, first of all, $5 a pound copper. Um, that's something new, something a little different. Yeah, we saw it briefly last May. What do you think is driving this move up from $4 to $5 in the first couple months of 2025?
Is this me talking to you or is everybody listening now?
Everybody's listening.
Well, first, thanks for having me. And I really put a lot of research and checked some of my theories and got the chance to look into this all. And so let's just look back a teeny bit into history and look into just last year where, copper was dubbed the new oil and copper blew past $5. And it seemed at that time that longer term sentiment was driving price. Like, oh my goodness, we just need so much copper. But then it was hard landing, soft landing, and then elections, and we had some ups and downs, and then oh no, China's slowing down, et cetera, et cetera. So it seemed like short term dynamics, but the overall long term dynamic on copper did not change. And then all of a sudden, it seemed it was around in February. There were these talks, early February, all these talks about tariffs came on. And it was clear when you're looking at the different inventories that there was a significant shift towards stockpiling copper in the United States. And we can go deeper into that and why, right? But it seemed, even for me at that time, I thought, oh, this is going to be short-lived, and then everybody's going to freak out about the impacts of copper on the world economy. And, Dr. Copper, that uses that term because copper normally is driven, at least in the short term, by the overall world economic health. But all of a sudden, these talks of tariffs became more real. And at the same time, it seems that China's economy is humming. And then also, I guess we have a backdrop of gold breaking 3,000. We have silver pushing towards $35. And I think it's just more people are seeing commodities as less risky than potentially other investments. So there might be a touch there of, safe haven buying, even in copper.
So Trump did this executive order in February, and basically it's an executive order that gives people in his government like 6 to 9 months to figure out the situation with, American copper, how much we import into the country, what we need to do to, I guess, onshore copper. And I mean, it's from people in the industry, it's pretty clear what they're going to find out. We only have 2 operating smelters and we haven't permitted a new mine in I don't know how long. So what do you think the implications are of the executive order, and what is maybe Trump not understanding about the copper mining industry?
So I think this is, completely opinion. And as you know, I'm full of opinion. First, I would say that Trump's goals here are very, well intended. And I think it's, there is an underlying problem that we have lost manufacturing in the United States, and we've kind of handed over the keys to strategic minerals to China, who have been doing this for decades, have been positioning. I myself was involved in an acquisition of Corriente in Ecuador, and that was at that time it was to secure supply to smelters. And I think the other one is that he hears China, 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 copper, 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 copper. But I'm worried that he thinks of it like it's oil, right? Drill, baby, drill, right? But doesn't understand that oil and metals are not the same, that it takes 29 years on average now to permit a project in the United States. And that's crazy. And then the bigger one is the dominance by China is dominated first through smelting and refining capacity. right? As you mentioned. And so they dominate that. But they also dominate the offtake. So they also have secured supply to their smelters to keep that chokehold. And I think that's the part that's been missing. I think there's a few things that have been missing. And if you don't mind me getting a little, get into some of the details, and I think if you
Yeah,
just
let's do it.
look on it on paper, right? You say, okay, the United States is using 2.4 million tons. That's around, call it 10% of world supply of refined copper, and it's producing 1.2, which means its imports 50%. Oh my goodness gracious, we have to fix that, but it doesn't seem like that big of a deal, right? Except for that's refined copper imports, right? It doesn't include cable, wires, or all that copper and electric motors, or all the other bits and pieces that copper is used in, which is probably a much bigger number. And China definitely knows this. And I almost feel like I'm watching a story going on where the term is called an assassin's mace, right? It's a strategy by China to use asymmetric style strategy in a new and modern world. And one of their assassin's mace is by far their control of strategic metals. And I think their biggest one is copper, right? It's definitely the biggest market and has the biggest impact on world economies and where we're going. And we can dive a little bit into that too. And that is also being missed. They control the copper, they control the smelting, which controls the copper, and they control the production chain. So if you're trying to build manufacturing in the United States, you have to have, from the very beginning, you need to have the supply, you need to have the refining and the smelting and refining capacity, and then you have to build the wire and then build the motors and build out a production chain. But if you don't have access to that material, so I think that China has shot a couple warning shots across the bow to the United States. Hello, look what I can do with antimony. Look what I can do with tungsten. Look what I can do with moly, right? And I think it was like a warning shot because I've worked with the Chinese and their expression was always carry flowers in your hand in front of you and carry a brick behind your back. Meaning, don't tell somebody I'm going to hit you with a brick. Give them kind of the idea that you could hit them with a brick. So it seems like their style, right? And I don't think it's registered yet that, if China wanted to, right, they could go, what? You want to put tariffs on my copper? Fine. Good luck. And then Tesla's going to call up and say, hey, can I have those electric motors? And they're going to go, nope, but I'll sell you a car. It's called BYD and it's a really good car. I'll sell you the car. I'm not selling you motors anymore. And that is a real risk that the United States is facing.
It's very interesting comments about the assassin's mace, and I think that's exactly right. I mean, I almost have no question that's exactly right. They have a multifaceted strategy to pull the plug on the U.S. and hurt the U.S. when they need to, if they need to at some point. And it doesn't necessarily involve armed confrontation. So you talked about the processing of copper in the U.S. and how we import the good stuff, the 99.9% pure final product. And a lot of it comes from Latin America. Some of it comes from Canada, and obviously some comes from China. So how do we increase our processing capacity? I mean, obviously building smelters, but how many smelters do you think the U.S. needs to build? And what do you know about timelines to build a smelter?
Well, Grok tells me the following. So let's look at two numbers. First, let's look at how China got here, right? How did China put itself in a pole position, which really has been a decision over decades, right? And I remember them saying, they said, we're not good at making an internal combustible engine. We can't compete with the United States. We can't compete with Japan. We don't really have a good supply of oil. Electricity is the future. So let's start moving and building out the production chains now and supplying and securing the materials needed for that in the future. And so just over the last decade alone, China has invested between 70 and $100 billion in copper supply chains. And that is just in mergers and acquisitions and what we can find out about their smelting and refining capacity. So it doesn't include maybe capital projects on brownfields projects or mine startups. Okay. So that's a big number, right? That's, call it $7 to $10 billion a year. And then for United States, just to fill the refining gap alone, and that is just to add, 1.2 million tons of capacity, it's probably $10 to $30 billion in new smelters. And that would at least take 5 years, right? And 3 years might be more realistic if you add in some of the parts. Just say, it got rubber stamped, right? It's going to take a few years, but I still think it's quicker to build the refining and smelting capacity than it is to build the supply of copper concentrates.
Yeah, new mines like the Resolution mine in Arizona has been a 20 plus year saga, and there's some optimism that the Supreme Court is going to rule favorably on it, and the two largest mining companies in the world are going to get to build that thing. But I was looking through their website for the project, and it seems to me, even if they got the green light from the federal government tomorrow, this won't be in production until 2035. And that's like maybe an optimistic timeline. It might be closer to 2040, quite frankly, because this is a very deep block caving operation. It's a very large ore body. It's complicated. It's not a simple task, but when it's in operation, it will be massive, and it will, supply the U.S. with about a quarter of its copper consumption. But then on the refining front, it's interesting because the U.S. has 2 operating smelters. Canada only has 1. And the one in Canada is called the Horn Smelter, and it was built in the 1920s. So these smelters, the ones in the U.S. were built in the 60s, 70s. There's one in Arizona near the Ray mine that I think was built in the 70s. That's the newest one that we have. So nothing. Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, and that one, I don't think that one is in operation, and it's owned by a Mexican company now too, which is also very interesting, right? So, what does it take to permit a smelter? I mean, obviously, I guess Trump thinks he can just sign an executive order and get anything done. I'm not sure it works that way, because there's a, regulatory process that is quite complex, both in the U.S. and Canada. And there's a whole bunch of, environmental stuff involved, right?
Okay. So first, you are going to let me reminisce a little bit and remember my first job out of university. I actually paid for school working in underground coal mines and said, where's the sunniest place I can go? I want to go someplace sunny, and ended up working for ASARCO at the Ray mine, which you just mentioned. And it was an amazing mine because it had a new plant, it had a new processing plant that had rod mills and ball mills, and had a nice brand new processing plant, which had, a brand new SAG mill. It had, leaching. So it had a big SX-V plant, and it had its own smelter, the Hayden smelter. And I remember being able to work. I actually worked 6 months in each. I was in a management development program. So we ran around and worked in different locations every 6 months. So it was a huge and interesting and an eye-opening experience. And then even there had the Amarillo refinery, which at the time was probably one of the biggest copper refineries that takes anode, makes cathode, takes it from that 98% to 99.9. So on the background, I think, there's a bigger one. Look at Codelco. Okay. Codelco, I think, has 5, 6, 7, I think it's 5 smelters, but Codelco has not built a single smelter. They have made improvements on existing smelters, but since their nationalization of Anaconda and others, they have not built a single smelter. And you ask yourself, why is that? And, normally the answer is one of 2 things. It's timelines, it's environmental. I think that's a big one, that China took advantage of saying, okay, you won't do it, I'll do it. The NIMBY-ness of not in my backyard. And people just didn't want to deal with it. But the second one was that China made the margins so small on refining, right, that, you can get a 98% payable, 97% payable on copper concentrates. And you're like, why go through the bother? And as a mining company, they go, I am offshoring my risk. It's hard enough to permit a mine. Why added the additional complexity of making a smelter, right? So if it's dependent on building a smelter and I don't get the permit for the smelter, then my mine is dead, which just was a Herculean task to get built. And then the third one is that because of these margins, everybody thought that smelters had to be ginormous, that you need to have a supply of 1 million tons per year in order to build a smelter. So it'd take 3 or 4 or 5 mines to justify the construction of the smelter. And it really just isn't true, because the money isn't in the refining, the smelting and refining, it's in the production chain, right? It takes $10 worth of copper to make an electric motor that you sell for $100. And that $100 motor goes into a $1,000 electric motorcycle, right? So the margins are in, and China knows this, right? And they've taken advantage of this fact. So I am less fearful that it would take, I think you could just add smelters to existing operations if permitting became easier or incentivized, right? Because there's so much value in the follow-up on the production chain. So again, I think that the United States could get ahead of itself. It could fix the refining problem, right? Because it's get the political will necessary to build a smelter, or build one in a jurisdiction that is friendly, right? I mean, that's another option, right? If you can't get it done in the United States, you can get it done outside the United States, but I think you can get it done in the United States. The bigger problem is what you just mentioned, right? There are very few near surface, quick into production resources in new copper projects, right? These big block caves that are 800, 1,000 meters or deeper, I think resolution is like over 2,000, maybe I'm thinking in feet, but it's deep, right? And these big block caves are difficult, lots of money. You have to get down that deep, but you also have to say, when I do the block cave, it doesn't mess up, right? And that's scary, right? So it's a big engineering endeavor, and that's why even resolution, if it started today, would take 10 years to get into production, because it's complex. I've seen block caves that they've spent $1 billion alone just on the feasibility study, right? So it puts it into context. And really, in my list that I've looked for, near surface, and I know there's more. Don't get me wrong. I know there's more, but in my research on near surface, big porphyry projects or big copper projects, there's only like 5. And that just puts it into context that I think that's where the focus is going to be, on projects that can get into production quickly and securing that supply. So, because once you build the smelting capacity, you also have to break into the supply, right? Which for me, you're going to need new supply to create your own production chain.
Yeah, you're talking about 5, new projects that are, near surface and of,
Correct.
large enough scale. Yeah. Okay.
Well, there's another thing that's happened is that, there's only been 4, maybe 5, depends on what year you put the cutoff, for big, large scale copper mines built in the last 5 years. Right?
Yeah.
The majority of new copper production has come from brownfields. And you can look it up in BHP's, did a great report on this that showed it was cheaper to add brownfields capacity than it was to build greenfields capacity, right? Mm-hmm. But they've milked that to death. There's just so little left, and now greenfields appears to be much cheaper than adding brownfields capacity, right? So that's why there's a new look towards bringing on new resources into the mix.
Okay, so to put up, so I want to talk about your company. I want to talk about the drill program. I want to talk about Porphyry Copper. But let's just put a bow tie on the Trump, executive order conversation. What, if you had to guess, when we wake up 6-7 months from now and we get an assessment of what this investigation has, revealed, what do you think the government is going, the Trump administration is going to say? And what do you think that the action steps might be on copper?
Okay, so there's multiple scenarios, but they all arrive to the same solution, right? That they don't get it. Say they say, oh, we just have to have 1.2 million tons. We can figure that out. That's not that big of a deal without forgetting about how much they're importing. You could say that China pulls that assassin's mace, or they just threaten, or whatever. But the solution really is that the United States needs to access or build more smelting and refining capacity in copper. And I think the driver and national security, it's interesting. Again, you mentioned it and you pointed it out very well. This is not looking in terms of economics. It's looking at security, right? And normally that implies military, but copper drives economies, right? It's a part of the re-electrification, et cetera. And some would argue it's about EV business, which I think should be scaring the heck out of the United States. So what it didn't BYD just announced today that they have a battery you can charge in 5 minutes, right? I think the next closest was Mercedes that was 15 minutes, right? So they're ahead on this race. And I always said a long time ago, that one of the reasons that Elon Musk bought Twitter was to solve the problem he had, which he knew this would eventually become a problem, that the supply of production chains to build out Tesla, that he would not be able to compete with China because they would, eventually say, well, we're not selling you electric motors. And he couldn't buy into the production chain because the environmental, et cetera, and he needed a new marketing arm, right? But I think that this will become, as the world deglobalizes, right? Globalization, the problem with that is that the average person didn't understand to drive their car, to build their house, to have their iPhone, to have all this. That material actually came from a mine, right? It was so far disconnected in a production chain that they didn't have to see it or live it, right? And this is going to bring it back home, right? So I think the bigger one for me, even though it's not a big percentage of the current supply of copper, right? It is where the race cannot be lost. And that is data centers and AI. And every time we look at new estimates, they're only going up, right? They're going, oh, it's going to be at 6% in 2 years. And like, well, it's actually going to be 8% in 1.5 years, right? Because it's a race, right? You cannot get behind in the AI and data center race, right? Otherwise you're dead, right? Because it's such a competitive advantage eventually to have the better AI. And so I think it's going to be, this is my prediction, it's going to be the tech companies that are going to be pushing this, that are going to be saying, you've got to get on top of this or we're dead. We're dead as a country and we're dead as companies. And one last statistic is that, I think it came from the BHP report, but it estimated we need $2 trillion of investment in copper by 2050, right? That is $85 billion a year, right? If you add up the biggest mining companies in the world, their market cap is probably about 500 billion. And you could probably estimate their copper component of that is probably 250 billion. So 250 billion worth of market cap needs to be spending $85 billion a year. Starts to sound like mining starts becoming more like a tech company in terms of research and development and capital outlays, right? So it's getting very interesting.
Yeah, that's a shocking stat. And granted, it's from the world's largest mining company, but that is a shocking stat. $2 trillion. Yeah, it's 25 years, but $2 trillion. I mean, to build one mine, big mine, might cost $2 billion, $3 billion. So 1,000 times the cost, the capex to build a large mining project, by 2050. That's extraordinary. I think that, we're seeing, I'm watching the futures right now above $5 a pound on copper, COMEX futures. This is data center driven. I really think that's the marginal buyer here. And some of the stats that we've seen on copper consumption in data centers may have been a little understated in 2024. And I think that may have been done intentionally because you don't want to talk up the thing that you need more of and you still haven't bought. And so we're seeing it. We're seeing their foot tracks in the in the futures market and in the physical that's being bought at a voracious pace. So let's talk about LBC. And I look at copper, $5 a pound. I look at the chart of LBC on the TSX Venture, and we're at 20 cents, down from 50 cents not too long ago, just in November. And so I speak with a lot of investors, Ian, and just in the last week, I think I've had 4 people contact me and say, what is going on here? Like, this stock is down while copper is going up, and they're drilling. And I don't know what's going on. Is there something wrong with the company? So I'm going to ask you here, is there something wrong?
Well, I'm of the opinion. I also did not expect we'd be at 20 cents after putting out 2 holes that would have been the top 10 best copper hole intersects in the world near surface into the project. If you look at Mining Hub and just look, even on a copper equivalent basis, they're, I think the 5th and 6th best copper equivalent holes, and that's competing against these copper gold intersects, right, that are 800 meters deep, right? So I didn't expect it either. But I think what's happened a little bit is that it's been a difficult market, right? We put out our first news in January 6th, and I think it was just a week or 2 weeks early. I think that, again, we put out the last hole and hoping right before PDAC, and we hit right between that lull of where copper spiked and then came back down a little bit as the world started worrying about the recession. And, just a little bit of weakness. We're still a very, very weak, even though there's an anticipation. It looks like there's that green shoot coming now on overall equities. By the way, we just hit $5 in copper right now. Is that the explanation was built around the softness, right? And I want to say a couple things. A, we're drilling. 2, we're looking at getting bigger, right? There's a commitment to the project to continue to move forward, and a little agnostic to price that builds one of the best buying opportunities I've ever seen, right? If you look at our grade of our project or size of our project, I wish I could put this on my website, but I think I'll get into trouble. But if you relook at Mocoa's resource using the metal prices that Solaris just put out in their MRE for Warintza, which is the closest bigger project. It's between Mocoa and Mirador, the project, which I helped start the construction of, right? On a copper only basis, Mocoa is higher grade. Based on a copper equivalent basis, it's like 40% higher grade. It's high. It's also near surface. Even if you look on, let's take it to a 0.5 cutoff, the ratio of high grade material at Mocoa is higher than Warintza. It's just 3 times smaller on a copper equivalent basis, about 2.5 times smaller, right? But it's obvious that Mocoa has that footprint. We put out 1 to the north, 1 to the southwest or west southwest, right? This is covering such a huge area, 1,000-meter holes mineralized from top to bottom. Right, it's pretty obvious, and the overall footprint is huge. Like, I believe that Mocoa could easily become 2, 3, or much bigger than it currently is. And I think the geologists are agreeing. The other little tidbit that the people that are listening will get into is just found out that the development of the first pulse of mineralization to the last pulse of mineralization that we've dated so far is 10 million years. To put it into context, the Mirador, I think, was 3 to 5 years, right? Bigham Canyon was, I think, like 5 million years, right? This is a big project, right? And it's creating one of the best buying opportunities I've ever seen. This is obviously unbiased in my opinion, but just based on a pounds per copper or dollars per market cap per pound of copper in the ground compared to Warintza, we're 26 times less. right? So even just getting it moving forward a little bit. The project of, sorry, I just lost their name. The guys in Namibia are
Yeah, that's
Haib project,
yeah. That's
Corex,
the Haib project by Corex. Yeah.
Corex, right? They have a similar size deposit, almost identical to Mocoa, right?
Mm.
It's smaller. It's smaller in copper equivalent basis. We have about 8 million billion pounds of copper equivalent at Mocoa. They're about 5.7 billion pounds, and their valuation is 10 times higher than Libero. So do I believe it's going to move eventually? We're continuing to drill. We're going to go bigger. It will start moving, and when it does, it will be violent.
It's interesting
The
that
other one,
hold on, just let me cut in for a second here. So it's interesting. You said a lot of things I want to follow up on there. 10 million years of being active. So this porphyry system was active in terms of its magmatic activity for 10 million years. That is actually a very good data point that I'm sure maybe some larger mining companies are paying attention to. That'd be interesting if you publish more on what you learned about the age dating of the system. I think that would be of great interest to investors. But I'm gonna be a little tough on you here, Ian, because copper stocks have rallied in the last couple of weeks, and yours has been going down. So for some reason, investors are selling their shares in your company, and they're buying shares of other copper companies. So what do you think you need to shift in terms of the messaging to the market? Because we can all look at the 5 billion pounds that you have in resource. We can look at the holes that you've published in the last couple of months. You had an incredible long intercept right through the heart of the deposit that was over 1,000 meters, which not many companies can even drill a hole like that, even if they wanted to. What's missing here? What are investors not getting that LBC is a 15 or a 13 million market cap, today?
well, I think that there's been some concern about Colombia, right? I would like to remind everybody that during this entire time that we haven't seen a single issue. And there's reasons for that because we're very strong on the ground and strong with our communities and strong relationships have kind of created it. And that's what I've been trying to do over the last 2 years to move this project forward is creating that insulation on the project. But I think another thing that people are missing is that, I've seen comments that said, hey, look at this article. Petro says no open pit mines in Colombia. And I was like, well, first he was talking about coal mines. But number two, do you guys know that in 14 months or the next round of presidential elections, and presidents can only run one round? They can't rerun. So we're not building a mine at Mocoa with Petro. So I think when people start realizing that, there's a reason that Rio Tinto, that Freeport-McMoRan, Anglo American have all positioned themselves in Colombia over the last year because they know it, right? So I think that's a big piece. And I think another piece is, with one drill running, putting out a little bit of news. It's kind of like I think market wants to see that this project is moving forward. And I think, taking it on and demonstrating that it's more than just this existing resource, the things I just mentioned, it could be a much larger project, and demonstrating that commitment and making sure that that's understood. Until then, I think all the key people, and there's some very key people involved in the project, are more than committed and happy to be taking this next step at current valuations, right? Creating an opportunity for others.
Yeah. So if I just look at the news flow contrast against the chart of the stock, January 22nd, you announce an at the market, stock offering essentially. So that, that's like an ATM, something the company's had in place previously. It's nothing new. But if I just look at the price action, that appears to have affected the market in a negative way, and it's been grinding lower ever since. So what feedback do you take from that? And I know you have a large shareholder, Frank Zustra. What's he saying? I mean, is he going to be investing more in the company? Is he continuing to back you?
I'm going to start off with, I think you're right, right? That was what was a day that started to dictate the conversation around the company. We've always had an ATM in place. I underestimated that, hey, we're just renewing our ATM would create that. It was some big chunks of shares came through that same day, which was a bad timing, you could say, perhaps. I can also say we haven't used the ATM. I haven't sold a single share into the ATM, so it's not the ATM drawing down on the company. And I hope everybody understands that if there's a fear of that, right? It hasn't been used. It's just a tool to create some awardless financing when it makes sense without capping the upside potential of the company. And I can say that Frank's committed, right? He was hoping to do future rounds at higher levels, but he's only seeing this as an opportunity because he knows where copper is going. He knows how rare it is to have a near surface porphyry deposit. And I would like to add, if I said only 4 projects have been built over the last 10 years, and by the way, I started the construction of one, and Ernie Mast got all the permits in place for the other one, right? One was in the Amazon jungle, and the other was in pristine jungle of Panama, right? So I would like to say to most people, it's not the things that you think are what don't move projects forward. It's having the political will. All new projects take political will, whether it's in the DRC, whether it was in Peru, which is the other one, whether it was in Panama or whether it was in Ecuador, right? Building political will through strong relationships locally and a strong reputation nationally is what drives projects through. And we're seeing a window for Mocoa with upcoming elections and the project now moving forward on solid ground. A minister of environment that's now resigned and out of the picture. The pathway is getting clearer. And I think that the share price should have already reflected it. But will definitely reflect it.
Based upon what I read about Petro, he's got no shot in 2026. So there's going to be a change of power there for sure. It's just a matter of who will take power. And I would have to think, just based upon who he's had as the mining minister, it's got to be better than what it's been, what you've dealt with the last few years. And it's a testament to you and your expertise there in the country that you got this program, underway with Petro as president. So you've done good work there in the in the town and in the with the locals. And I was there personally in 2022, and I saw the engagement with the locals and the support that you have, that the company has in the area. So let's talk about the drill program, because really at the end of the day, we could talk about the 5 billion pounds. We could talk about the potential to double it and all of that, the pie in the sky, but rocks are hard and water is wet, and the results are the results. So you put out news on February 26th, hole MD045. Tell us about that hole, what you learned from that hole, and then I want to follow up because there was a couple of choice paragraphs in that news that I really caught on to, and I want to, inquire about further.
Oh, I wish you would let me know what you caught on to, because that would help me say what I would say. But
well, I have to have a follow-up question.
So there's 2 things. So hole 44 went directly north, right? And it followed another one of the breccias. There's multiple breccias. And I don't know if you missed PDAC, and you would have seen the amount of geologists and majors that came to our booth, right? And they were shocked at the amount of different breccias that are mineralized, but also the porphyry and host rock, right, is also mineralized. So many different textures, so many different alterations, all of them mineralized. right? And then, oh, of course it's 10 million. This makes so much sense now. And there was an excitement around the project. So 44 went north and it was testing another one of these breccias because these are the higher grade feeders in one of the many pulses, right? But hole 43 hit into what seemed like the most, the highest grade feeder to the system. Not the only one, right? But one of the highest grade feeders, one of these breccias. But the end of that hole got out of it, right? So we also wanted to test further south. So we turned the drill, we steepened it up a little bit. And it also was a great hole, number 45, but it also got out of at the end of it, it got out of that breccia. We're still, I mean, it got down 850 meters, I believe, before it got out of the breccia, and still was an absolutely amazing hole. Even if it gets out of the breccia, it continues mineralization, but we still haven't found the bottom of where this mineralization is coming from, but it also opens it up a further south. But 46, which we're doing now, is more to the east because that's the area we see. It's completely open to the east. There's no drill holes around it. The geochemistry on surface is showing great geochemistry on surface, and we're going, and it's within, most of it is within the existing pit limit, would have been considered waste. And so that's what we're doing there. So what did you see in the news release that caught your eye?
There were a couple of paragraphs in the February 26 news that talked about the overprinting and the spatial, variability in the alteration assemblages. And that leads to a conclusion that there could be multiple porphyry centers that have, pumped fluids into the system, essentially. Yeah. And so that's something that I was always curious about ever since I first, looked at the project. And it seems like you have more evidence of it based upon the holes that you've drilled in the last several months. So what more can you tell us about the potential for more than one porphyry center, where those additional porphyry centers might be lurking?
So I invite everyone just to go onto the website and download the presentation. And there's a slide that shows the mapping that shows lithocap or porphyry outcrops. It shows geochemistry, copper of rocks only. It doesn't show our soils, rocks and moly, and then it shows the geophysics, and I think it's magnetics. And so the majority of our mineralization, we're seeing a potassic alteration with a sericite overprint. What does that mean? Potassic has lots of magnetite, sericite wipes it out, right? So what you see is a demagnetized zone, and there's a big, gigantic footprint, but also around it, you see multiple targets, and these are all potentially new porphyry centers. And the Jurassic porphyry is famous for that. And if you had mineralization over 10 million years, then it's saying, okay, maybe this was more than one. We're seeing B veins over C and C veins over B, for example. So it's saying, okay, this was definitely more than one mineralized pulse coming through this. And then, there was some deeper detail into that paragraph that explains this. And one of the reasons we'd like to do a bigger program is because it allows us to be more aggressive on testing some of these newer areas and testing the overall footprint of the project. A luxury I don't get right now based on our current valuation and only one drill turning because, with only news coming out every month and a half, it's tough, right? So it really creates more flexibility to go bigger. And as many within even the Fiore group have mentioned, this is a project that tomorrow needs at least 3 drills on it because of its potential size and scale.
Yeah, so I can agree with that. I think it should have 3 drills on it. You should have one doing, wildcat holes. So the Barnezera target, so I'm not sure if I'm sure I'm not saying it right. The Barnezera targets to the south. So there's 4 targets that are exactly due south of the core deposit area. That looks very interesting to me based upon slide 24 in your presentation. What can you tell us about that area? And is that the place that you would step out to if you had more cash?
So that's my favorite one, right? Because it looks like there was been a shift. So we have some cores that are plunging. One plunges down to the northwest, and one that plunges to the west. And then we have some holes in between that aren't too good from the previous drilling. But then you show this Barnizesa. Yeah, it's a hard word. Barnizesa targets that I love because they're lower elevation, they're closer to surface, et cetera, et cetera. I get excited about them. But this, what's really exciting, a lot of the geologists is to the east, the Neblina and Piedra-Lisa. And what's the excitement about Piedra-Lisa is that it looks, because if I put the soils, you see the big halo of zinc around it. It looks like a completely intact porphyry on that. But I think either way, right? I mean, you could just see the distance on that map, the distance between the existing resource area and the overall footprint size. That taking some of these bigger step outs, being able to show the potential size and scale of this project, will be a big change for the company.
So, I mean, you agree you should have 2 to 3 rigs going. I agree you should have 2 to 3 rigs going. Does Frank Zuster agree you should have 2 to 3 rigs going?
He is currently agreeing.
Okay. Sounds good. So I noticed your goals for 2025 resource update later this year. Tell us about that. I know you can only say so much, but maybe a ballpark in terms of your internal goals for how many pounds of copper and moly that will be added in that.
Sure. So, and there's a reason to do an interim. First of all, I wish this project never had a resource estimate. I know why it was done. It was done to create a valuation after the spinoff of B2 Gold. But the problem is everybody is going through exactly what's going on now. How do you expand 600 million tons without understanding that this might just be the tail of the elephant on a much larger project, right? But we've talked about this in previous spaces that if I was a major mining company, right, I would want a great project. And by the way, you should see some of the cross sections that are within the presentation. And I'll give one more stat. Looking at the Mocoa project at a 0.5 cutoff, because Warintza did this. Remember, they did their conceptual starter pit grades, right? It would be about 200 million tons, and it would run 0.46 copper and 0.74 copper equivalent. 0.74 copper equivalent based on current copper and moly prices. So 200 million tons is about 30,000 tons per day over 20 years, which is the perfect startup size. But every company wants big projects. We know how much copper we need. We know the size of the copper they're currently producing. So they want that upside to be 150, 180, 200, 210,000 tons per day. But 30 is a perfect size because it's the biggest the biggest sag mills, the biggest haul trucks to get you to that size of project, right? And that means getting over 1 billion tons. And that's billion tons of mineable resource, right? I'm talking PA terms, right? So you have an amount of resource and then the amount actually mined. So that is what we're trying to target, getting over those key psychological numbers and demonstrating to market that, look, this project is getting bigger. So it's not necessarily in terms of total copper. I mean, I could just about calculate it. We know that the grades are very disseminated on this project. We have about 30%, which contains high grade core and 70% at the nominal grade. What the total pounds would look like on this project. But the bigger goal is getting to those tonnages that make it attractive to constructors.
Okay, so final question, then I got to hop because I have a 1 o'clock as well. Hole 46, currently, is that still underway? What can you tell us about hole 46, and what can you tell us about when we should see some more assays from the company?
Yeah, we go through a daily debate, and I'm probably saying too much, but we go through a daily debate because the biggest purpose of this hole is a significant step out within the existing pit constrained resource or a potentially pit constrained resource. Um, and but we have the capacity to go down. We've gone down. We've always tried to get to about that 1,200 meters, and we've been all a little bit shy on being able to do that as the limit of the drill. But the other one is, while you're in mineralization, it's hard to stop a drill. Okay, so we go through a daily debate of when we'd actually finalize that hole, but we're down about 750 meters today. And it's a daily conversation. So last hole, it was about a week and a half turnaround between finishing a hole and getting the assays and getting the news release out.
Wow, that is world record speed in the junior mining sector. A week and a half. I've never heard that fast. Wow.
There's advantages to living here, speaking the language, understanding the politics, understanding, what it takes to navigate through this. But the other one is, working even with your suppliers. So we have an amazing relationship with them. So they give us really good turnarounds. So everybody knows all the sample prep is done in Colombia. All the assays are reported on atomic absorption for copper and moly. We, in our very first holes, way back when, we did the AA, confirmed it with ICP, have done the work to make sure it correlates. We always follow up with ICP afterwards, but we can report on the AA grades, which is atomic absorption, which is available in Colombia. ICP is sent out, I think, to Panama to complete.
Wow, that's impressive. Companies in Canada and the U.S. should take notes. They're more like 6 to 8 weeks. Okay, so based upon what I hear you saying, the hole's still going, though it may be completed, at any time now, and then probably 2 weeks for the assays from hole 46 as soon as the hole is completed. So that could be 2, 3, 4 weeks, just all depending upon when the hole is completed. Sounds like we could hear some other news from the company, though. I'll just leave that there, shortly. Very interesting. Thank you, Ian. Thank you for your time. I think this was a wide ranging conversation. We addressed a lot of key topics, and looking forward to doing it again, maybe in April. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a ton. Always a pleasure to go in these deep conversations and talk about copper.
This will be up on my YouTube, Goldfinger Capital, in the next couple of days. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Cheers.
Thanks.